The air smelled of rain and fresh ink. I stood in the hallway, holding a thick, cream-colored envelope that had been pushed through our mail slot, my name and address printed in a font that felt too formal for our little house. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't a letter from a friend. It was a deed to a plot of land I had never seen in a town I had only ever driven through. And next to the line marked owner was my husband's name. Mark. His signature, a confident, arrogant scrawl I knew as well as my own. But the money that paid for it, was all mine. Every last cent. I was still standing there when he came home, the sound of his keys in the lock making me jump. He walked in, shaking the water from his coat, a huge smile plastered on his face. He looked like a man who had just conquered the world. He saw the envelope in my hand. His smile widened. "You found it. I was hoping it would get here before I did. Surprise." I couldn't find my voice. The paper felt heavy, like it was made of lead. "Mark, what is this?" "It's our future, Andrea. It's everything we've talked about." We had never talked about this. We had talked about fixing the roof. We had talked about maybe taking a trip one day when we'd saved up enough. We had never, not once, talked about buying 10 acres of undeveloped land an hour and a half away. "This is my grandmother's money," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The words felt fragile in the air between us. "It's our money now," he corrected, his tone still light, still cheerful, as if he were explaining a simple game. "And I put it to good use. It's an investment, babe, a real legacy. I'm going to build a vineyard." A vineyard? The word sounded so absurd, so completely alien to our life. Mark didn't know the first thing about grapes or soil or business. He was a graphic designer who dreamed in Pantone colors, not profit margins. "You spent all of it?" I asked, my gaze fixed on his signature on the deed. He finally seemed to notice the tremor in my voice. His smile faltered just for a second. "I spent what we needed to secure the land, the best plot in the whole valley. It was a steal, Andrea. It would have been gone by tomorrow." He took a step closer, reaching for my hand. I pulled back. The hurt in his eyes looked performative, practiced. "Don't you trust me?" he asked, the ultimate trump card in his deck. It was a question designed to make me feel small, to make me feel guilty. And for so many years it had worked. My grandmother, Clara, had been a woman of quiet strength and profound common sense. She worked as a seamstress her entire life, her fingers nimble and sure. She never owned anything fancy, but her small house was always warm, and she never owed a single person a single cent. The money she left me wasn't lottery winnings. It was the physical result of 60 years of careful, disciplined living. It was her life's work, distilled into a number in a bank account. "For a rainy day, Andrea," she'd told me, just a few months before she passed. We were sitting in her kitchen, the scent of lavender and old paper hanging in the air. She'd pushed a small, carved wooden bird into my palm. It was smooth and simple, its little head cocked to one side. "Don't let a charming fool talk you into squandering it on sunshine and promises. Security is its own kind of love." A charming fool. It was as if she had met Mark already. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the sound of his steady breathing beside me. He had fallen asleep the moment his head hit the pillow, content and untroubled. To him, the matter was settled. He'd made a grand gesture, and now it was my turn to be grateful, to be the supportive wife. I slipped out of bed and went to the living room. On my nightstand, the little wooden bird sat, a silent witness. I picked it up, its familiar weight a small comfort in my hand. I sat on the sofa, the deed spread out on the coffee table in the dim light. I read every line, every piece of legal jargon. The purchase price was staggering. It was almost the entire inheritance. He had left just a few $1,000s in the account. Enough to make it seem like it wasn't completely empty, I suppose. A token gesture. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't an investment. It was a theft. A quiet, smiling theft, wrapped in the language of love and shared dreams. But it wasn't a shared dream. It was his dream. A dream he had built on the foundation of my grandmother's hard work, without ever once asking me if I wanted to be a part of it. The silence in the house was deafening. It felt like the walls themselves were disappointed in me for letting this happen, for being so blind. I had married a man who saw my security as his opportunity. The next morning, he was all smiles again. He made coffee, whistling a cheerful tune that grated on my raw nerves. "Big day today," he announced, pouring milk into my mug without asking. "I'm driving out to the property. Want to come see it? You'll fall in love with it, I promise." "I can't," I said, my voice flat. "I have to work." He sighed, a theatrical puff of air meant to signal his disappointment in my lack of enthusiasm. "Okay, babe. But you've got to get on board with this. This is a good thing, a great thing for us." He kissed the top of my head and walked out the door, the sound of his car starting up a moment later. "For us." The words echoed in the empty kitchen. I looked around at our small, rented house, at the crack in the ceiling we were supposed to fix, at the stack of bills on the counter. None of that was part of his dream, I realized. His dream was somewhere else, on a patch of dirt he now owned, while I was left here, in the reality he had no interest in sharing. That's when the isolation began. It was a slow, creeping cold that started in my chest and spread through my limbs. I told myself it didn't matter, but it did. It mattered more than anything. In the days that followed, our home transformed. It was no longer a shared space, but an office for his grand project. Topographical maps were spread across the dining table. Books on viticulture were stacked on the floor. He was on the phone constantly, talking to architects, to soil specialists, to contractors. He used the word "we" in all these conversations. "We're thinking of a modern-style tasting room. We're confident the soil is perfect for Pinot Noir." The "we" was a lie, a convenient shield he used to legitimize his unilateral decision. I was the silent, invisible partner. The bank. His family, of course, thought it was wonderful. His mother, Brenda, called me, her voice gushing with pride. "Andrea, honey, I just heard the news. A vineyard. Oh, it's just like him. Mark always had such vision, even as a little boy. You are so lucky." I gripped the phone, my knuckles white. It was a bit of a surprise, Brenda. There was a slight pause on her end. "Well, the best things in life often are. You can't hold a man like Mark back. He's a dreamer. It's your job to support that, to be his rock." Her words felt like tiny, sharp stones. I wasn't his rock. I was the quarry from which he was mining his materials. I tried to talk to my best friend, Sarah, over coffee. I laid out the story, my voice quiet, trying to sound reasonable, not hysterical. She listened, stirring her latte, her brow furrowed. "I mean, I get why you're upset he didn't ask," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But Andy, it's kind of romantic, isn't it? He's building a future for you two. Most guys are just thinking about video games. Mark is building an empire." I felt a chasm open up between us. She didn't get it. She saw the grand gesture, the romance of it all. She didn't see the disrespect. She didn't see the violation. Or maybe she did, and she just thought I should be grateful for it. That night, Mark was buzzing with excitement. He had met with a well-known local architect who was, in his words, totally into the project. He said we could be the premier destination winery in the region within 5 years, Mark said, his eyes shining. He was pacing the living room, a glass of wine in his hand. 5 years, Andrea, can you imagine? I was sitting on the sofa, the little wooden bird in my hand, its smooth surface cool against my skin. I had been looking at our joint bank account statements online. Mark hadn't just spent the inheritance. He'd also taken out a line of credit against our shared home, the one we were renting, but had a joint savings account for a down payment on to pay for the initial consultations and surveys. He was leveraging a future we had built together to fund a future he had designed alone. "Where did you get the money for the architect?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. He stopped pacing. He took a long sip of his wine. "I just moved some things around. It's all part of the startup cost. You have to spend money to make money, babe. That's business 101. You used our down payment savings, didn't you?" The silence was my answer. He wouldn't look at me. He stared into his wine glass as if it held all the secrets of the universe. "It was just for a deposit," he mumbled. "We'll pay it back as soon as the first loan comes through." The first loan. For the construction, the planting, the equipment. "I'm meeting with the bank next week." He said it all so casually, as if he were discussing what to have for dinner. My heart felt like a cold, hard knot in my chest. He wasn't just spending my grandmother's money anymore. He was now gambling with every single thing we had, and my name was on all of it. I felt a sudden, dizzying sense of vertigo. I was a passenger in my own life, and the driver was flooring the accelerator, heading straight for a cliff. "I want you to stop," I said. The words came out stronger than I expected. He finally looked at me, a flicker of genuine annoyance in his eyes. The charming, excited husband was gone. In his place was a stranger with a cruel set of a mouth. Stop what? Stop building our future? Stop trying to make something of myself? I thought you'd be proud of me. You lied to me, Mark. You've been lying to me for weeks. I haven't lied, he said, his voice rising. I just handled it, because you get so worried about money, Andrea. You're just like your grandmother, always afraid to take a risk. Well, I'm not. This is my one shot, and I'm taking it. He had weaponized my grandmother's prudence, turning her greatest strength into a character flaw of mine. He was mocking the very person whose life savings he was burning through. The argument that followed was the worst we'd ever had. It was ugly and loud, and he said things that I knew would hang in the air between us forever. He called me ungrateful. He called me a coward. He said I was trying to sabotage his dream out of jealousy. By the end of it, I was hollowed out, exhausted. He stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. I sat there in the ringing silence for a long time. The house felt huge and empty. I walked from room to room, touching the furniture, looking at the photos of us on the walls. Us smiling on vacation. Us at our wedding. In every picture, we looked so happy, so in love. Who was that woman? Who was that man? I felt a profound sense of shame. Shame that I had been so naive. Shame that I had handed over my trust so completely to someone who valued it so little. I had allowed myself to become a footnote in my own life story. I went online and started doing my own research. I looked up the land he'd bought. It was beautiful, I couldn't deny that. Rolling hills, old oak trees. A perfect place for a vineyard. I looked up the architect he'd hired. He was talented, expensive, and known for his grandiose projects. Then I started looking into the financial side of starting a winery. The numbers were astronomical. The risks were immense. Even the most successful ventures often took a decade or more to turn a profit. Mark hadn't just taken a risk, he had jumped into an abyss, dragging me down with him. 2 weeks after our big fight, things had settled into a new, terrible normal. We were polite strangers living in the same house. He spent most of his days at the property, and most of his evenings on the phone, planning. I went to work, came home, and tried to figure out how to untangle my life from his. He had become a local celebrity of sorts. The town newspaper wrote a small article about the ambitious new winery project, featuring a picture of Mark, smiling proudly, standing on his asterisk land. The article called him a bold entrepreneur, with a clear vision for the future of the valley. My name wasn't mentioned once. I was at the grocery store when I saw it. His face smiling out from the front page of the local paper, right there in the checkout line. I felt my face flush with a heat that was part embarrassment, part rage. The woman behind me in line tapped my shoulder. "Isn't that your husband?" she asked, smiling. "How exciting for you both. He's doing such a wonderful thing for the community." I just nodded, unable to speak. I paid for my groceries and fled, my heart pounding in my ears. He wasn't just erasing me from our future. He was erasing me from our present. I drove home in a daze. The betrayal was no longer a single event. It was a living, breathing thing that was growing every day, consuming everything I thought was real. He hadn't just taken my money, he had taken my identity. He had taken my voice. He was home when I got back, sitting at the dining table, which was now his permanent desk. He was hunched over a set of blueprints, a look of intense concentration on his face. He didn't even look up when I came in. I walked over to the table and dropped the newspaper in front of him. He glanced at it, then back at me, a smug smile playing on his lips. "Pretty cool, huh? The reporter was a great guy. He really gets what I'm trying to do here." "What asterisk were asterisk trying to do, you mean?" I asked, my voice laced with an irony so bitter it tasted like acid. He finally put his pen down and leaned back in his chair, looking at me with an expression of weary patience. "Andrea, we've been over this. Are you still upset about that? I thought we were past it. This is happening. It's real. You can either get on board, or you can not." He left the alternative hanging in the air, a threat wrapped in a choice. I stood there, looking at the man I had promised to love and honor. The man who was now treating me like a difficult investor he had to manage. He saw my pain as an inconvenience, my concern as a nuisance. I thought of my grandmother's hands, the tiny pinpricks on her fingertips from a lifetime of sewing. I thought of her quiet dignity, her unwavering self-respect. She had never allowed anyone to make her feel small. She had built her life on her own terms, stitch by careful stitch. And here I was, allowing her legacy to be unraveled by a man who didn't even have the decency to include my name in a newspaper article. He was looking at me, waiting for my surrender, for my apology, for my acceptance. He expected me to fold, just like I always had. He expected me to smooth things over, to prioritize his feelings over my own, to accept the story he was writing for us. I looked from his expectant face to the blueprints of a future I never asked for, built on the ghost of my grandmother's savings. That's when I realized he hadn't just spent my inheritance. He had given me a gift. He had shown me, in the clearest possible terms, that the man I married didn't exist anymore, if he ever had. And the woman who had let him walk all over her was about to disappear, too. I took a deep breath. The air tasted metallic, like the moments before a storm. He was still watching me, that look of impatient condescension on his face. He was waiting for the tears, for the fight to drain out of me, for the weary acceptance. So I gave him something else. I smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It was small and tired and probably didn't reach my eyes. But it was enough to break the tension, and it was the last thing he expected. "You're right," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "You're right. It's happening. I'm sorry." The confusion on his face was immediate. He blinked, his posture shifting from defensive to uncertain. "You're sorry." "I'm sorry," I repeated, the words feeling foreign and calculated in my mouth. "I've been emotional. It was a shock. But you're right. This is our future. I need to get on board." I walked over to the table and looked down at the blueprints. I pointed to a square-marked tasting room. "This looks big." He was still processing the sudden change, but his ego was a powerful engine, quick to restart. A slow, triumphant grin spread across his face. "It has to be. It's the centerpiece. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the vines, a huge fireplace." "It sounds beautiful," I said. And the lie was the first brick in a new foundation I was laying for myself, in the dark, where he couldn't see. That night, I made a promise to myself. Not a loud, dramatic vow, but a silent, cold commitment. I would not be a victim. I would not be a footnote. And I would honor my grandmother, not by mourning what was lost, but by using the very prudence he mocked to protect what was left of me. My new life began the next morning. Mark left early, humming, energized by my surrender. The moment his car was out of the driveway, I went to my laptop. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about survival. My first search was for a lawyer. Not a big, flashy firm, but someone small, discreet, and specializing in financial and family law. I found a woman in the next town over, a name on a quiet website with testimonials that spoke of her tenacity and her compassion. I sent a short, carefully worded email requesting a consultation. Then, I started to build my fortress. I opened a new bank account at a completely different bank, an account only in my name. I had my paycheck redirected there. It was a small amount, but it was mine. It was the first act of separation, a quiet declaration of independence. I gathered every piece of paper I could find related to the vineyard, the original deed, copies of the bank transfers. The loan application Mark had started. I scanned every single one, creating a digital file that I saved to a secure cloud server, then deleted from our shared computer's history. The house became a library of his ambition, but I was its secret archivist. I studied the documents late at night, long after he had gone to bed, exhausted from a day of playing landowner. The little wooden bird sat beside my laptop, a silent partner in my research. I learned the language of his new world. I learned about escrow, title searches, and non-marital assets. I learned that an inheritance, if kept separate, often remained the sole property of the beneficiary, even in marriage. And that's where I found it. The mistake. It was in the bank statements from the month of the purchase. My grandmother's money had been in a trust account, solely in my name. The day before he bought the land, Mark had initiated an online transfer. He moved the entire sum from my trust account into our joint checking account. The very next day, a wire transfer for nearly the exact same amount went from that joint account to the seller's title company. He had commingled the funds. It was a legal term I now understood with chilling clarity. He had deliberately muddied the waters, turning my money into our money in the space of 24 hours, giving him the legal standing to spend it. But the digital footprint was undeniable. The money had paused in our joint account for less than a day. It was a clear, traceable path. He hadn't just used our joint account, he had used it as a temporary bridge to take something that was mine alone. My heart was pounding. This wasn't just a loophole, it was a doorway. A week later, I drove to my consultation with the lawyer, whose name was Alina. Her office was in a restored brick building, up a quiet flight of stairs. It smelled of old books and lemon tea. Alina was in her 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor that put me instantly at ease. I told her everything, my voice low and even. I laid out the printed copies of the bank statements, the transfer records, the deed. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I presented the facts as I had learned them. She listened, her fingers steepled, her eyes scanning the documents. When I finished, she was silent for a full minute. I held my breath. "He was sloppy," she said finally, her voice crisp. "And arrogant, it's a potent combination." She looked at me, a flicker of something like respect in her gaze. "Your inheritance was a non-marital asset. By moving it through the joint account for the express purpose of an immediate purchase, he created a clear case of fraudulent conveyance. He effectively laundered your inheritance to convert it into a marital asset that he could control. Fraudulent conveyance. The words were ugly and legal and perfect. They gave a name to the sick feeling I'd had in my stomach for weeks. "So what can I do?" I asked. "You have several options," she explained. "We can file for a legal separation and demand the asset be returned to you. We can place a lien on the property. Given the paper trail, a judge would almost certainly rule in your favor. It would be messy, and it would be a fight." She paused, looking down at the deed. "But there might be another way, a quieter way." And that's when the plan began to form. Not just a plan for survival, but a plan for justice. The kind of quiet, poetic justice my grandmother would have appreciated. "The bank loan," Alina said, tapping the application Mark had left on the table. "He's applying for a significant construction loan, using the land as collateral, correct?" "Yes," I said. "He's convinced it's a sure thing." "A bank's due diligence is extensive," she continued. "They will do a thorough title search. They will verify the legitimacy of the collateral. An asset acquired under these circumstances, it's a tainted asset. It compromises the entire loan application." A slow-blooming idea took root in my mind. So if the bank knew? Alina smiled, a thin, knowing smile. If an interested third party were to, say, anonymously provide the loan officer with a package containing these documents, the bank would see the collateral for what it is. A disputed property. They wouldn't touch it. The loan would be dead on arrival. No shouting. No confrontation. Just a quiet, irrefutable presentation of the truth to the one party that had the power to stop his dream in its tracks. "He won't know it was me," I whispered, the beauty of it dawning on me. "He'll suspect," she corrected gently, "but he'll never be able to prove it. It will look like the bank's own risk assessment department doing its job. And by the time he figures out what happened, we'll have already filed our own motions." I left her office feeling lighter than I had in months. The shame was gone, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. He had used the system to betray me. I would use the very same system to reclaim myself. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in deception. I played the part of the slowly converted, supportive wife. I asked about the loan progress. I listened to him talk for hours about different grape varietals. I even drove out to the property with him one Saturday. I stood on that hill, the wind blowing through my hair, and looked out at the rolling landscape. It was beautiful. I felt a pang of sadness for the future we could have built if he had only been a different man. "See," he said, putting his arm around my shoulders. "I told you you'd love it. In a few years, this will all be rows of vines." "Our vines?" I leaned into him, a gesture that felt both natural and utterly false. "It's incredible, Mark. You did this." "We did this," he said, correcting me now. The "we" was back now that I was no longer a threat. I just smiled and looked at the horizon. "We did this." Inside, I was counting down the days. Alina and I prepared the package for the bank. It was simple, professional, and anonymous. Just the facts. Copies of my trust account statement, the joint account statement showing the in-and-out transfer, and a simple cover letter outlining the provenance of the funds used to purchase the property, listed as collateral in loan application number 7B4, whatever it was. We found the name of the senior commercial loan officer at the bank's regional headquarters online. The package would go directly to him, sent by courier from a city an hour away. The day I dropped the package at the courier service felt momentous. It was a rainy Tuesday. I watched the van pull away, carrying its quiet little bomb, and I felt a strange sense of peace. The outcome was out of my hands now. All I had done was hold up a mirror. It was up to the bank to see the truth in the reflection. Mark was in the best mood I had seen him in for months. His final meeting with the bank was scheduled for the following Friday. He was absolutely certain the loan was going to be approved. He had already started promising contracts to builders, contingent on the funding. "We need to celebrate in advance," he announced on Wednesday night, pulling a bottle of expensive champagne from the fridge. "To the future, to Carter Estate Vineyard." He had already named it. After himself, of course. I raised my glass, the bubbles fizzing against my lips. "To the future," I echoed, my voice perfectly even. The night before his bank meeting, he was like a kid on Christmas Eve. He laid out his best suit. He rehearsed his presentation for me, full of charts and projections that were, as far as I could tell, pure fantasy. "They're going to be blown away," he said, his eyes gleaming. "This is the start of everything, Andrea." I nodded, helping him adjust his tie. "I know it is." He fell asleep easily, dreaming of his empire. I stayed awake for a long time, holding the little wooden bird in my hand. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't excited. I just felt still. I had done what I had to do. I had protected my grandmother's legacy, and in doing so, I had protected myself. Whatever happened tomorrow, I was no longer the woman who stood in the hallway holding that deed in stunned silence. I was the architect of my own life now. The next morning, he left the house radiating confidence. He kissed me at the door, a quick, possessive peck on the lips. "Wish me luck," he said. "You won't need it," I replied, and I meant it. I spent the day in a strange limbo. I went to work and tried to focus, but my mind was elsewhere. I imagined the scene at the bank, the handshakes, the coffee being poured, and then the moment the loan officer would clear his throat and slide a folder across the table. I imagined the look on Mark's face as his perfect, self-made future dissolved in front of his eyes. I didn't feel joy at the thought. I just felt a profound sense of equilibrium. The scales that had been so violently tipped were simply being set right. He was supposed to be home by 3. At 4, he still wasn't back. At 5, my phone rang. It was him. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Hello." There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear the sound of cars passing. He was in his car, pulled over somewhere. "Mark," I prompted gently. "They said no," he said, his voice a dead, hollow thing I had never heard before. "The loan, they turned it down." I feigned surprise. What happened?" "I don't know," he lied, his voice cracking. They said there was an issue with the collateral, a title uncertainty, some legal garbage. They wouldn't give me any details. They just said the deal was off. Indefinitely." He was breathing heavily, a ragged, panicked sound. Someone must have tipped them off, a jealous competitor, someone who wanted the land. He was already building a new narrative, one where he was the victim of a mysterious, external enemy. He would never, ever believe the enemy was the quiet woman he had so thoroughly underestimated. "Oh, Mark," I said, my voice full of practiced sympathy. "That's terrible. What are you going to do?" "I don't know," he shouted, the desperation finally boiling over into anger. "I have contracts out, I have deposits down, I'm ruined before I even started." I listened to him rant, to him curse the bank, the world, his terrible luck. I let him spin his story of victimhood. I made quiet, soothing sounds into the phone. He finally exhausted himself, his anger deflating back into that hollow despair. "I'm coming home," he said, his voice small. "Okay," I said. "I'll be here." I hung up the phone. I walked to the living room window and looked out at the darkening street. The rain had started again, soft and steady. I knew this was just the beginning. The collapse of the loan was the first domino. Now the rest of his paper empire would start to fall. And I would be there to watch. Not with glee, but with the grim satisfaction of a promise kept. That's when I realized that justice isn't always a clap of thunder. Sometimes it's the quiet, relentless rhythm of the rain, slowly washing away a foundation of lies. He walked in just after 6, dripping rainwater on the welcome mat. He looked smaller somehow. The boundless confidence that always seemed to make him take up so much space had evaporated, leaving behind a man who looked tired and hollowed out. He didn't look at me. He just walked past, into the kitchen, and opened the refrigerator. He stood there for a long time, staring at the contents as if he'd never seen them before. "Did you eat?" I asked from the doorway. It was a normal question, a wife's question, but it sounded absurd in the heavy silence. "I'm not hungry," he said, closing the door without taking anything. He finally turned to face me. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face pale. "This is a nightmare, Andrea, a complete nightmare." "We'll figure it out," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I was an actress in the final scene of a play he didn't know I had written. "Figure it out." "How?" he asked, his voice rising with a frantic edge. "The bank has blacklisted the property. I called a broker I know, someone who specializes in agricultural loans. He said a title uncertainty is the kiss of death. No one will finance it, no one." He started pacing the small kitchen, his hands running through his wet hair. "It has to be Henderson, the guy who owned the land next door. He wanted my plot. He must have called the bank, made up some story. He was building his fiction, brick by painful brick. He needed a villain, and it couldn't possibly be him." I just listened, nodding at the right moments, my face a mask of concern. Inside, I felt a cold, calm stillness. The storm was his. I was just watching it from a safe distance. The days that followed were a slow, agonizing descent. The phone started ringing at all hours. It was the architect first, wanting to know why the deposit check hadn't cleared. Then it was the soil consultant. Then the surveyors. Mark's initial panic curdled into a sullen, defensive anger. He stopped talking about the vineyard. The blueprints were rolled up and shoved into a corner. The books on viticulture gathered dust. His dream was now a source of deep, festering shame. He refused to tell his family. When his mother called, he'd put on a cheerful voice and talk about how well everything was progressing. He was living a double life, the successful visionary to the outside world and the trapped, desperate man inside our home. Our home. It felt less like a home every day and more like a pressure cooker. He was short-tempered and distant. He'd spend hours on the computer, presumably looking for alternative financing, for some miracle that would save him. About 2 weeks after the loan was refused, a certified letter arrived. It was from the law firm representing the architect. It was a formal demand for payment, threatening legal action. I left it on the dining table for him to find. I heard his sharp intake of breath from the living room. A moment later, he appeared in the doorway, the letter shaking in his hand. "They're suing me," he whispered, his face ashen. "They're going to sue me." "Us," I corrected him gently. "My name is on the initial consultation agreement, remember? I signed it, for us." The reality of that single word hit him like a physical blow. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. He wasn't just losing his dream anymore. He was dragging me and our entire financial life down with him. The debt was not just his, it was ours. The failure was now communal. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice muffled by his hands. It was the first time he had used the word we and meant it. The first time he was asking for my help, not demanding my compliance. It was too late. "I think you need to sell the land," I said, my voice soft but firm. "It's the only way. Cut your losses before they get any worse." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a raw, wounded pride. "Sell it? No, I can't. It would be admitting defeat." "It's admitting reality, Mark," I said. "This isn't working. We can't afford to keep it. We can't even afford the property taxes that will be due soon, let alone the lawsuits." He stared at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. My calmness, my rationality, it was unsettling to him. He had expected me to be hysterical, to be panicked. He didn't know what to do with this quiet, resolute version of me. "You want me to sell it, don't you?" he said, his voice low and accusatory. "You never wanted this. You've been waiting for it to fail." "I've been waiting for you to see the truth," I replied, holding his gaze. "You gambled, Mark. You gambled with my grandmother's memory, and you lost." The mention of my grandmother broke something in him. He didn't have a defense for that. He just looked away, defeated. The fight was gone. That night, I met with Alina again. "He's starting to crack," I told her, sipping the tea she had ready for me. "The bills are piling up. He's talking about selling." "Good," she said, her expression professional but kind. "That's the opening we need. A distressed seller is a motivated seller." We finalized the plan. Alina had already set up a limited liability company, a shell corporation with a neutral, forgettable name. Mountain View Holdings, LLC. It was registered in another state, its ownership completely opaque. This LLC would be the buyer, and the funding for it would come from me. I still had that small amount left from the inheritance, the few $1,000s Mark had so graciously left in the account, and my own credit was perfect. I had spent the last month paying down every bit of our shared, minor debts from my new, separate account. I was what the bank had failed to see in Mark, a responsible, low-risk borrower. Elena helped me secure a small, personal loan. It was more than enough. Mark would have to sell the land for significantly less than he paid. The title uncertainty, which would still be a footnote on any official search, combined with his desperation to unload it quickly, would drive the price down. He would be selling his 10-acre dream back to me at a discount, and he would never know. The money from the sale would go directly to paying off the debts he had incurred, the architect, the surveyors, the consultants. He wouldn't see a cent of profit. In fact, he would still be at a net loss. My inheritance wouldn't be fully restored, but the land, my grandmother's legacy in physical form, would be. It was clean, it was legal, and it was devastatingly just. The for sale sign went up a week later. Mark hired a local real estate agent, a man he knew socially. I watched from the living room window as they hammered the sign into the ground at the edge of the property. Mark stood with his hands in his pockets, his shoulders slumped. He looked like a man attending his own funeral. He had betrayed me for that patch of dirt, and now he was being forced to sell it to save himself. An offer came in 2 days later. It was from Mountain View Holdings, LLC. It was low, but it was an all-cash offer with a quick closing, which was exactly what a desperate seller needed to hear. The agent called Mark, ecstatic. "You've got a buyer, Mark. They're serious. A bit of a lowball, but for cash, you should take it and run." Mark hesitated. His pride was still fighting a losing battle with his terror. "Who are they?" he asked the agent over the phone. I was in the next room, listening to every word. "Some investment company from out of state," the agent said dismissively. "Who cares? Their money is green. I say we accept." Mark sighed, a long, rattling breath of surrender. "Okay," he said. "Fine, draw up the papers." I closed my eyes. The final domino had been pushed. The closing was scheduled for a Friday, 2 weeks later. It was all handled remotely. Mark just had to go to a local notary's office to sign the final transfer documents. He was quiet and withdrawn all week, a ghost in our house. The relief of being out from under the debt was completely overshadowed by the humiliation of his failure. He had mocked my grandmother's prudence, and in the end, it was a prudent, faceless corporation that was swooping in to pick apart the bones of his extravagant dream. On the day of the signing, he put on a suit, as if for a job interview. He looked at me before he left, a strange, lost expression on his face. "I'm sorry, Andrea," he said. It was the first time he had apologized for any of it, but the words were empty. He was sorry it had failed. He wasn't sorry for what he had done. "Just get it over with," I said, my voice neutral. He came home an hour later. He walked into the house, took off his jacket, and laid a folder on the dining table. The same table where he had spread out his blueprints, where he had toasted to his own success. "It's done," he said, his back to me. "The money is being wired to the lawyers to pay off the debts. There might be a few thousand left over." I didn't say anything. I just waited. I let the silence stretch for a full minute, then I walked over to the table. I had my own folder in my hand. I opened it and took out a single, crisp piece of paper. It was a copy of the new title deed, filed just that morning. The one that listed the owner as Mountain View Holdings, LLC. Underneath that name, in smaller print, it listed the name of the sole managing member of the LLC. My name, Andrea. I placed it on the table next to his closing documents. He didn't notice at first. He was staring out the window, lost in his own private misery. "Mark," I said quietly. He turned around slowly. He looked at the paper. He read the name of the LLC, then he read the name underneath it. He read it again, and again. The color drained from his face. It was a terrifying thing to watch. All the life, all the air seemed to rush out of him at once. He looked from the paper to my face, his mouth opening and closing silently. He looked utterly, completely broken. There was no rage, no shouting. Just a profound, bottomless shock. The mysterious competitor, the jealous enemy, the faceless corporation, it had been me all along. The quiet, supportive wife he had dismissed and ignored. "How?" he finally whispered, his voice hoarse. "You taught me," I said, my voice steady. "You taught me that paperwork is important. You taught me about moving money around. You taught me that you have to be willing to take a risk." I picked up the little wooden bird from the mantelpiece, its smooth, familiar shape a comfort in my palm. But my grandmother taught me something more important. She taught me that true security isn't about owning things. It's about knowing your own worth. He sank into a chair, the same one he had collapsed into weeks ago. But this time, it was different. This wasn't the shock of a setback. This was the shock of total annihilation. He hadn't just been outmaneuvered, he had been dismantled, piece by piece, using the very tools of arrogance and deception he favored. He had been so focused on the grand vision, he had never once bothered to look at the person standing right next to him. He had been betrayed. Not by a competitor, but by the consequences of his own actions, delivered quietly, efficiently, and with perfect, irrefutable legality. That's when I realized that poetic justice wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. The world had been knocked off its axis, and I had simply, quietly, set it right again. I didn't stay to watch the full extent of his collapse. I had already packed a bag. It was waiting by the door. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't say another word. He just sat there, staring at the deed that bore my name, a monument to his spectacular, self-inflicted ruin. I walked out of the house and didn't look back. The rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, fresh, and full of possibility. A week later, I drove out to the land, my land. The for sale sign was gone. I had the agent take it down the same day. I parked my car by the old oak tree at the entrance and just sat for a while, looking out at the rolling hills. There would be no vineyard, no modern glass tasting room, no empire built on a foundation of lies. I got out of the car and started to walk. The ground was soft from the recent rain. I walked to the highest point, the spot where Mark had stood, wrapping his arm around me, talking about our asterisk future. I stood there for a long time, the wind cool on my face. I held the little wooden bird in my hand, its simple form a connection to the woman who had made all of this possible. Her discipline, her love, her foresight. Mark had called her 60 years of careful living a fear of risk. But he was wrong. It wasn't fear. It was wisdom. It was the understanding that a life, like a house, must be built on a solid foundation, not on dreams and borrowed money. He had wanted a legacy. He had wanted his name on something grand. But a legacy isn't a building or a brand. It's the quiet impact you have on the world, the integrity you leave behind. My grandmother's legacy wasn't the money. It was the strength she had instilled in me, the strength to stand up for myself, to demand respect, to reclaim what was mine. I looked out at the 10 acres of untouched land. It didn't need to be improved or developed. It was beautiful just as it was. Wild, quiet, free. I decided in that moment what I would do with it. I would put it in a conservation trust. It would be protected, preserved, and left alone for generations to come. A quiet tribute to a quiet woman. It would be called the Clara Preserve. Her name, not his, would be the one attached to this land forever. I finally understood what she meant when she said security was its own kind of love. It was self-love, the act of protecting your own peace, your own future. I didn't hate Mark anymore. I didn't feel much of anything for him at all. He was just a chapter in my life that was now over, a painful lesson that I had learned and survived. I regretted the years I had lost, the trust I had misplaced. But I would not let that regret define the years I had left. He had tried to erase me from my own life, but instead, he had given me the tools and the motivation to rewrite it from the beginning. Respect can't be bought or stolen. That's what I learned. It has to be earned. And the most important respect is the kind you give to yourself. If this story moved you, please take a moment to subscribe. More true-to-life tales of courage, family, and quiet revenge await here. Thank you for listening.